I have been waiting for you. Welcome to my domain, the Portal of Dread. Here, each story is not merely a tale, but a portal I open directly to your worst nightmares. With me, fear is not just told, it is felt in the soul. Turn off the light. Lock the door. Let your own breath guide you through the inevitable labyrinth of madness. If you possess the foolish courage to cross this threshold, subscribe to the channel. And to prove your insolence, type in the comments, "I am not afraid." Now, prepare yourself. The unknown is already here. Today's story. Supernatural account at Santa Clara Hospital. The scent of ether, commingled with antique mildew, invaded the nostrils like a premonition. On the 5th floor of Santa Clara Hospital, situated deep within the historic center of Salvador, the air conditioning, defunct for months, transformed the Bahian heat into something almost palpable, a viscous adhesive presence that clung to the staff's skin like a secondary layer of chilled perspiration. It was the small hours of Tuesday morning when Paula Santos adjusted her surgical mask for the 10th time that night, attempting to filter out not only the antiseptic hospital odors, but also the mounting conviction that something was profoundly amiss in that institution. Santa Clara Hospital had been established in 1889, its colonial walls standing as silent testaments to over a century of human suffering. The Portuguese azulejos, once pristine white, now bore sallow stains that no cleansing agent could fully eradicate. The soaring windows, fitted with their wrought iron grills, filtered the street lamplight into somber, skeletal patterns that danced across the dimly lit passageways, creating shapes that seemed to shift whenever direct attention was withdrawn. In those pre-dawn hours, as Paula arranged the surgical instruments in operating room 3, she could not dislodge the persistent feeling of being scrutinized. Not by colleagues or patients, there was something more primeval, more ancient about that surveillance. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the vacant halls with a reverberation that seemed to linger longer than was natural, as if the hospital itself were whispering in response. Dr. Eduardo Vilas Boas, the chief of surgery, had arrived precisely at 2 o'clock that morning for the emergency procedure. His gaunt silhouette sliced through the corridor's gloom like a sharp blade, and Paula noticed how his hands, invariably so steady during operations, were trembling almost imperceptibly as he scrubbed his nails with fastidious precision. There was something in his eyes, a disconcerting depth, as if he were burdened with secrets no mortal should ever possess. The patient, Maria Jandira da Silva, a 73-year-old woman, lay sedated on the gurney, yet her lips moved constantly in an inaudible murmuring. Paula leaned in and managed to discern fragments. "They are coming. The shadows. Don't let them take me." The words dissolved into an archaic Portuguese she could not fully grasp, intermingled with what sounded like African dialects long forgotten by time. Santa Clara Hospital harbored histories that medical texts would never record. And in those pre-dawn hours, while the light's flickering fluorescence danced erratically above the operating table, and Paula was beginning to realize that some secrets are buried so profoundly that they only resurface when the line between life and death becomes perilously thin. If you seek experiences that challenge the boundaries of the inexplicable, subscribe to the Portal of Dread and delve with us into this true story that shook the very foundations of one of Brazil's oldest hospitals. Paula had worked in numerous hospitals during her 5 years in the profession, but she had never experienced anything resembling the occurrences at Santa Clara. Patients arrived with conventional ailments, appendicitis, fractures, cardiac emergencies, but something shifted the moment they crossed those century-old doors. It was as if the building itself altered their blood chemistry, their perception of reality. The first case that deeply perplexed her occurred 3 weeks before Dona Maria Jandira's surgery. A 40-year-old construction laborer had been brought in unconscious after a workplace accident. Nothing extraordinary, until during the procedure to remove a cerebral hematoma, he began to scream while under deep general anesthesia. These were not screams of pain. They were words, entire sentences, as if he were conversing with someone invisible in the operating room. "You can't take me now, I have children," he shrieked, while Dr. Vilas Boas worked with steady hands, apparently impervious to the phenomenon. "I didn't do anything wrong. Please let me go back home." The cardiac monitor showed the patient was profoundly sedated, yet his words emerged crystal clear and desperate. Paula checked the anesthesia levels 3 times. All were normal. What disturbed her most was the fact that Dr. Vilas Boas showed no surprise whatsoever. His hands continued working with surgical precision, as if sedated patients screaming for their lives were merely part of the standard hospital routine. When Paula questioned him after the surgery, he simply stated, "The human brain is a mystery, Nurse Paula. Sometimes, during trauma, it accesses layers of consciousness that science does not yet comprehend." But Paula knew there was something more. She began to pay closer attention to the details that had previously gone unnoticed. The way the operating theater lights always flickered during the most complex surgeries, creating shadows that seemed to move independently of the objects casting them. The sound of the monitoring equipment that, at times, formed rhythms almost musical, as if they were the mantras of a forgotten religion. And above all, the way Dr. Vilas Boas would whisper imperceptible words during the procedures, moving his lips in synchronicity with some ritual known only to him. Santa Clara Hospital had been erected on a plot of land with a peculiar history. Paula discovered this while speaking with Seu Manoel, the janitor who had worked there for 30 years. During a break on the graveyard shift, he recounted that before it became a hospital, the site had housed an asylum for the mentally infirm in the 19th century, and prior to that, during the colonial period, it served as a holding depot for slaves recently arrived from Africa. "My girl," Seu Manoel said, wiping his thick glasses with a tarnished cloth, "this ground here has drunk more tears and blood than any cemetery I know. Some nights I hear weeping coming from the cellars, even though I know nothing is down there but the storeroom and the old boilers." He paused, glancing around to ensure they were isolated. "And there's more. Dr. Vilas Boas, he knows these histories. I've seen him numerous times in the dead of night, descending to the sublevels with strange books, muttering to himself in tongues I've never heard." Paula began to scrutinize Dr. Vilas Boas with systematic rigor. She noticed he always arrived at the hospital exactly at 2 in the morning, even when no surgeries were scheduled. His impeccably maintained hands bore small scars on the palms, marks that appeared deliberate, as if they were part of some blood rite. During procedures, he had a habit of touching the patient's foreheads before making the initial incision, whispering something that sounded like incantations in dead languages. The case that truly initiated the schism between the rational world and the inexplicable occurred the week preceding Dona Maria Jandira's surgery. A 22-year-old woman had been admitted following a motorcycle accident. Severe cranial trauma, critical condition. During the surgery to relieve the intracranial pressure, the patient began to speak in archaic Portuguese, describing scenes of torture and death that precisely corroborated historical records of the slave trade era in Bahia. "The men of iron brand us like cattle," she was saying, while Dr. Vilas Boas worked on her exposed brain. "The shackles are heavy, the ships reek of death. Please let me return to my land, let me see my mother one last time." The words flowed in a dialect Paula later recognized as being of Angolan origin, mixed with 17th century Portuguese. The most unsettling moment was when the patient addressed Dr. Vilas Boas directly. "Doctor, you know the way, you have always known. Why won't you leave us be? Why do you keep us trapped here?" At that instant, Paula witnessed something she would never forget. Dr. Vilas Boas completely halted the procedure, his hands visibly trembling, and responded in a low voice, "Because the time is not yet right. You still have work to complete." The patient died 3 hours later, not due to surgical complications, but from an inexplicable cardiac arrest. All subsequent examinations showed that the procedure had been technically flawless. There was no medical reason for the death. In the official report, Dr. Vilas Boas wrote, "Post-operative complications resulting from severe cerebral trauma." But Paula knew she had witnessed something that transcended medicine. And when Dona Maria Jandira was admitted the following week, babbling about shadows and whispering in ancient tongues, she realized she was on the cusp of uncovering secrets that could cost her own sanity. Santa Clara Hospital was not merely a place of healing. It was a portal between worlds, and Dr. Vilas Boas was its most seasoned guardian. The question tormenting Paula was, guardian of what, precisely? And what was the price patients paid for crossing that fine line between life and death? Dona Maria Jandira's surgery was scheduled for 3 in the morning. A simple gallbladder removal which, under normal circumstances, would be considered a routine procedure. But Paula had learned that at Santa Clara Hospital, nothing was truly routine. As she prepared the operating room, she determined that the time had come to delve deeper into the mysteries haunting those centuries-old walls. During the dinner break, Paula descended into the cellars, following Seu Manoel's directions. The subterranean corridors were even more oppressive than the upper floors. The humidity created a dense atmosphere that seemed to siphon the oxygen from her lungs, and the smell of mildew mixed with something indefinable, something organic and putrefied, made every breath a conscious effort. The original stone walls still displayed rusted iron rings, unmistakable vestiges of the period when the location had served as a slave depot. At the end of a particularly narrow corridor, Paula found a door made of heavy, solid wood not listed on any of the hospital's architectural blueprints. The antiquated lock stood ajar, suggesting recent passage. Gently pushing the door open, she was confronted by a circular chamber illuminated by candles arranged in an intricate geometric pattern. The walls were lined with shelves overflowing with ancient tomes, vials holding liquids of dubious colors, and artifacts that seemed better suited to an anthropological museum than a modern hospital facility. In the center of the room, a dark stone table bore stains that time had failed to completely efface. Paula immediately recognized the configuration. They were bloodstains, distributed in a manner suggesting repeated rituals spanning decades. Resting upon the table, an open book displayed yellowed pages covered in elaborate script, written in archaic Portuguese and symbols she could not decipher. Fascinating, isn't it? Dr. Vilas Boas's voice sliced through the silence like a sharp blade. Paula spun around, finding him framed in the doorway, his features partially illuminated by the flickering candlelight. I had anticipated that your scientific curiosity would ultimately lead you to this place, Nurse Paula. Dr. Vilas Boas, I was merely... Paula attempted to formulate an explanation, but the words withered in her throat when she observed that the doctor's eyes reflected the light in a manner that seemed fundamentally inhuman. You were investigating, doing precisely what I would have done in your stead. He stepped into the chamber, closing the heavy door behind him. This hospital possesses a calling that transcends conventional medicine, nurse, and you, with your acute sensitivity, have begun to perceive it. Dr. Vilas Boas approached the central table, trailing his fingers over the dark stains with a disturbing familiarity. Santa Clara Hospital was built deliberately upon this specific site, not by accident or convenience, but because the very ground here is saturated with concentrated suffering. Centuries of pain, dread, and mortality have forged a kind of spiritual nexus, a point where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead becomes permeable. Paula felt her legs threaten to buckle, but she forced herself to remain upright. What you are asserting is impossible. There is no scientific basis for science. Dr. Vilas Boas chuckled, a dry sound that reverberated off the stone walls. Nurse Paula, science is merely one mechanism for comprehending reality. There are forms of knowledge far more ancient, far more efficacious. He reached for the open book on the table, turning its pages with reverence. This is an 18th century grimoire, penned by a Portuguese physician who charted the very same phenomena I am documenting today. He developed techniques to harness the spiritual energy concentrated in this locale. Harness it how? Paula asked, though a part of her dreaded the answer. The patients who arrive here in critical condition, Paula, are hovering on the threshold between two worlds. In that moment of transition, their souls are temporarily dislodged from their physical forms. That is when other consciousnesses can occupy the vacant space. Dr. Vilas Boas closed the book, looking directly into Paula's eyes. The entities that inhabit this place, spirits of tortured slaves, patients from the old asylum who perished under atrocious conditions, they yearn for an opportunity to experience the sensation of being alive once more. Paula understood with mounting horror. You are allowing spirits to possess the patients during surgery. Not allowing, facilitating, controlling. Dr. Vilas Boas smiled, and Paula noticed his teeth appeared keener than she remembered. Every successful surgery is a bargain. The entities briefly experience the sensation of inhabiting a living body, and in exchange, they impart medical knowledge that no medical school could teach. Why do you suppose my surgical success rate is unparalleled in the region? This is monstrous, Paula whispered, retreating toward the door. This is evolution, nurse. The medicine of the future will not be limited to what we can see and touch. It will incorporate spiritual dimensions that will exponentially broaden our capacity for healing. Dr. Vilas Boas took a step closer. And you, with your natural sensitivity to these phenomena, would be an invaluable addition to my work. Paula tried to open the door, but the handle wouldn't budge. Let me out. First, you must fully grasp the magnitude of what we are accomplishing here. Dona Maria Jandira, for instance, carries within her genetic memory the trauma of 3 generations of enslaved women who labored on this very site. During the surgery early this morning, she will not merely be operated on, she will be serving as a medium so that those tortured souls may finally find peace. And if she perishes in the process? Dr. Vilas Boas shrugged. Some discoveries necessitate sacrifices, but I can assure you that her death will not be in vain. Every soul we release furnishes us with knowledge that saves dozens of other lives. Paula finally managed to open the door, but before leaving, she turned back one last time. You are playing God, Doctor. No, Nurse Paula, he replied, his voice reverberating down the corridor as she fled. I am doing the work that God should have completed long ago. Paula sprinted through the subterranean passages as if pursued by demons, and perhaps that was precisely the case. Her lungs were searing by the time she finally reached the elevator, her hands shaking so convulsively that she could barely press the button for the 5th floor. The wall clock read 2:45 in the morning. In 15 minutes, Dona Maria Jandira's surgery would commence, and Paula knew she could not simply disregard what she had uncovered. As the elevator doors slid open, she was met by the familiar sounds of surgical preparations. The metallic clinking of instruments being arranged, the low thrumming of equipment powering up, the muffled murmur of conversation among the technicians. Everything seemed uncannily normal, as if she had merely fabricated the entire conversation in the basements. But as Paula stepped into Operating Theater 3, she observed details that had previously gone unnoticed. The fluorescent lights had been partially dimmed, casting a gloom that was unconventional for surgical procedures. Dr. Vilas Boas was already present, but his surgical scrubs featured nearly imperceptible, intricate embroidery, symbols Paula now recognized as being similar to those she had seen in the book from the basements. The other members of the team, 2 anesthesia technologists she had never encountered before, moved with a seemingly choreographed coordination, like actors performing roles they knew by rote. Dona Maria Jandira lay on the operating table, seemingly sedated, yet her eyes fluttered restlessly beneath her closed lids, as though she were experiencing intense dreams. Her lips continued to move in inaudible whispers, and Paula noted that her skin exhibited a ghastly pallor that far exceeded what was normal for a preoperative patient. It was as if all vitality was being systematically sapped from her body. Nurse Paula, Dr. Vilas Boas greeted her, without lifting his eyes from the instruments he was meticulously arranging. I trust your excursion through the lower levels proved illuminating. Now you may observe the practical application of what we discussed. Paula approached the operating table, battling against every innate instinct that screamed at her to flee. Doctor, I cannot permit you to do this to her. Dona Maria Jandira is a person, not a recipient vessel for your experiments. But it is far more than that, Dr. Vilas Boas replied, finally meeting Paula's gaze. His eyes had taken on a disconcerting depth, like dark, abyssal pits that seemed to devour the surrounding luminescence. Dona Maria Jandira is a direct descendant of Yemanja Conceição, a slave who perished on this exact site in 1847. Her genetic lineage carries spiritual memories that trace back 3 generations of suffering. During the surgery, these memories will become accessible. The 2 anesthesia technicians began preparing equipment Paula did not recognize. Alongside the conventional medical apparatus, they positioned small metal receptacles containing substances that emitted colored vapors, creating an atmosphere more akin to a religious rite than a surgical procedure. The walls of the operating theater seemed to pulse faintly, as if the building itself had developed a heartbeat. "I'm calling security," Paula declared, heading toward the internal phone. "No, you are not," one of the technicians replied, and Paula recognized the voice as belonging to Seu Manoel, the custodian. But when she spun around to face him, his features had warped. The gentle eyes of the man she knew were replaced by a vacant stare, as though he were a puppet controlled by an extraneous will. "The young woman will remain here and learn. You will assist us in liberating the souls that have been bound for over a century." Paula grasped with mounting dread that the entire hospital staff was complicit in the cabal. There was nowhere to flee, no one left to appeal to for help. Santa Clara Hospital was not merely the site where Dr. Vilas Boas conducted his experiments. It was a living organism, a collective entity that had tainted everyone who labored within its walls. Dr. Vilas Boas made the first incision into Dona Maria Jandira at 3:03 in the morning. The instant the scalpel touched her skin, the lights of the entire hospital flickered simultaneously, as if the electrical infrastructure had suffered a systemic overload. An impossible draft began to circulate through the operating room, causing the metal instruments to resonate with sounds resembling distant dirges. The temperature plunged dramatically. Paula could see her own breath condensing in the air, and the operating theater windows began to fog with a moisture that appeared ex nihilo. Dona Maria Jandira opened her eyes, but they were no longer her eyes. They were the eyes of someone far younger, someone who bore a sorrow infinite and a primordial dread. "Please," she whispered in a voice that was not her own, "do not let them mark me again. I have suffered enough. My children, where are my children?" The words emerged in 19th century Portuguese, commingled with African dialects that made the surgical instruments resonate like funerary chimes. Dr. Vilas Boas did not halt the procedure. His hands continued to work with preternatural precision, as if guided by an intelligence that transcended his own medical acumen. "Yemanja Conceição," he stated, addressing not the patient, but the entity that had usurped her body. "You have been confined here for far too long, but to be liberated, you must impart to us the secrets you garnered during your years of anguish." The voice emanating from Dona Maria Jandira's throat shifted once more, becoming deeper, more ancient. "The secrets of pain are also the secrets of healing. The suffering body develops resistances that conventional medicine fails to grasp. But the cost? The cost is invariably the same." "What is the price?" Dr. Vilas Boas inquired, while his hands continued to operate with a finesse that defied human anatomy. "One soul for every soul set free. Someone must remain to keep the portal agape. Someone must shoulder the burden of this knowledge." Dr. Vilas Boas ceased the procedure and looked directly at Paula. "Nurse Paula, do you now grasp why I required you to witness this? You will be my successor. When my tenure here concludes, someone must carry on the work." Paula attempted to scream but found that her voice had vanished. Santa Clara Hospital had begun to stake its claim on her, and she could feel her own soul being slowly absorbed by the centuries-old walls that enclosed her. Paula felt as if unseen roots were burgeoning through the floor, penetrating her feet and ascending her legs, permanently binding her to that cursed locale. The sensation was physically palpable. She could feel something cold and viscous coiling through her veins, altering her blood chemistry, rewriting her genetic code at a cellular level. Santa Clara Hospital was not merely a structure. It was a spiritual parasite that fed upon the vital essence of all who labored within its confines. The surgery persisted, but now Paula could perceive beyond physical reality. Translucent forms hovered around the operating table, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds. They were the spirits of all who had perished in that location across the centuries. Shackled slaves with festering wounds, patients from the old mental asylum whose eyes were glazed over with lunacy, victims of the experimental surgeries Dr. Vilas Boas had performed over decades. All of them watched the procedure with desperate hunger, craving the opportunity to experience once more the sensation of inhabiting a living body. "You can see them now," Dr. Vilas Boas noted, observing Paula's horrified gaze. "This signifies that the transformation has already commenced. Soon you will be able to communicate directly with them, to channel their knowledge, to serve as a bridge between the worlds of the living and the dead." Dona Maria Jandira, or the entity that had possessed her body, began to convulse on the operating table. Yet these were not medical seizures. It was as if multiple consciousnesses were vying for control of a single vessel. Her voice alternated among different languages, ages, and genders. At times, she spoke as a slave child pleading for her mother, others as an adult man shouting orders in forgotten African dialects, and occasionally as an elderly woman chanting incantations that caused the surgical instruments to vibrate at impossible frequencies. The hues of vapor emanating from the metal receptacles began to form patterns in the air, creating three-dimensional symbols that Paula vaguely recognized from nightmares she had suffered throughout her life. These were symbols that predated written language, etched into humanity's collective unconscious through millennia of suffering and transcendence. "What is it you want from me?" Paula managed to whisper, though her voice sounded hollow, as if coming from a great distance. "We want you to understand," the collective voice of the spirits replied through Dona Maria Jandira's mouth. "Pain and healing are two sides of the same coin. There can be no true medicine without an understanding of suffering, Dr. Vilas Boas learned this, as others learned before him, as you will learn now." Paula began to experience flashes of memory that were not hers. She saw herself performing surgeries using techniques that no medical school taught, curing illnesses that science deemed incurable, yet always at a dreadful cost. Each patient saved demanded an equivalent sacrifice, not necessarily death, but always a transference of suffering from one soul to another. Dr. Vilas Boas completed the cholecystectomy with a precision that transcended normal human ability. His hands moved, guided by knowledge accumulated across generations of physicians who had done the same diabolical pact. As he completed the final suture, Paula noticed that the scars on his palms had begun to bleed, dripping onto Dona Maria Jandira's incision and sealing some manner of spiritual covenant. "It is consummated," Dr. Vilas Boas declared, peeling off his surgical gloves. Yamanja Conceição is free to proceed on her path, and her ancestral medical knowledge now forms part of our repository. Dona Maria Jandira reopened her eyes, but they were now unmistakably her own. The expression of terror and disorientation on her face was genuine. "Where am I? What has happened to me?" She attempted to sit up, but the lingering effects of the anesthetic kept her debilitated. "You have undergone a successful surgery, Dona Maria," Dr. Vilas Boas replied with the professional cadence Paula recognized from their normal shifts. "You will be fully recovered within a few hours." But Paula could see beyond the veneer. Dona Maria Jandira was physically mended, yet a portion of her soul had been permanently altered. There was a pall in her eyes, a profound sadness that had not existed prior to the procedure. She would forever carry the residual memories of her ancestors' suffering, absorbed during the ritual. "Now it is your turn, Nurse Paula." Dr. Vilas Boas approached, gripping a scalpel that reflected the light in a manner that seemed hypnotic. "A small incision on your left palm. A ritual cut that will seal your permanent connection to this place and to the knowledge it safeguards." Paula glanced around desperately, seeking an avenue of escape, but the spirits had materialized sufficiently to barricade all exits. They did not appear malicious, merely infinitely weary, infinitely sorrowful, desperate to share the burden of centuries of accumulated suffering. "I can choose not to do this," Paula stated, even though she knew the choice was nothing more than an illusion. "You may," Dr. Vilas Boas conceded, "but then you will carry the knowledge without possessing the power to wield it. You will witness the suffering of every patient without being able to truly alleviate it. Madness would be inevitable." Paula grasped that there were only two options: become an active participant in the supernatural conspiracy, or descend into madness under the weight of secrets she could neither disclose nor utilize. It was a choice between different forms of damnation. As she extended her left hand, accepting the scalpel, Paula felt the last defenses of her normal humanity dissolve like wet paper. Santa Clara Hospital had claimed one more soul, and the lineage of the cursed physicians would continue for yet another generation. The scalpel sliced Paula's palm with a precision she had not anticipated from her own trembling hands. The blade seemed guided by an external force, creating a perfectly geometric incision that formed a complex symbol, a combination of straight lines and curves that pulsed with an inherent light the moment the blood began to flow. The pain was intense, but there was something more disquieting. A sensation of completeness, as if she were finally stepping into a role that had always been destined for her. The blood that flowed from her palm did not fall to the floor. Instead, it levitated in the air, forming small crimson spheres that orbited the operating theater like miniature planets. Each drop carried a part of her vital essence, and Paula could feel her consciousness expanding as her physical strength waned. It was as if she were simultaneously dying and being born into a completely new existence. Dr. Vilas Boas collected a few drops of the floating blood in a small vial of black glass. "This blood now bears the spiritual signature of the hospital," he explained, observing how the crimson liquid acquired a supernatural luminescence within the vessel. "It will be used to seal contracts with future entities we wish to invoke. You have just become a permanent part of the mechanism that keeps this place functioning." Paula attempted to speak, but discovered that her voice had completely changed. When she finally managed to emit sound, it was a harmony of multiple voices speaking in unison. Her own voice mingled with echoes of the consciousnesses that now shared her body. "I can hear all of them," she said, her words reverberating with impossible frequencies. Hundreds of voices, each one carrying memories of pain and knowledge. The spirits that had previously hovered around the operating table now approached Paula, not as separate entities, but as extensions of her own expanded consciousness. She could access their memories as if they were files in her mind. Medical techniques developed through centuries of experimentation on human bodies, anatomical knowledge obtained through dissections performed on people still alive, pharmacological secrets extracted from plants that grew only in soil, fertilized by human blood. "The knowledge is heavy," the collective voice whispered through Paula. "Every technique you will learn will save lives, but it will cost pieces of your soul. Every patient you cure will leave marks, lasting imprints on her psyche. This is the covenant we all entered into. Unfettered medical competence traded for gradual spiritual damnation." Dona Maria Jandira had been moved to the recovery ward, but Paula knew that her genuine convalescence would remain perpetually incomplete. The woman would forever bear the spiritual stigmata of the ritual, transforming into a living vessel for ancestral memories. In subsequent generations, her progeny would be born possessing a preternatural sensitivity to the suffering of others, a simultaneous boon and malediction that would be perpetuated throughout her genetic lineage. Dr. Vilas Boas secured the vial containing Paula's blood in a hidden compartment concealed within his operating table. "Now you comprehend the solitary nature of this endeavor," he stated, his voice weighted with decades of accumulated melancholy. "We cannot forge genuine connections with normal individuals. We are precluded from having traditional families. Our solemn commitment to the entities residing within this locale permanently severs us from the rest of humanity." Paula felt this solitude taking root in her bones like a spiritual affliction, akin to arthritis. She would never again be able to make physical contact with another soul without sensing echoes of every agony that person had endured throughout their existence. Never again could she gaze upon a patient without concurrently viewing every affliction they would develop in the future, every demise they would witness, and the totality of the suffering awaiting them. The augmented medical acumen was coupled with a form of clairvoyance that rendered quotidian existence nearly intolerable. "How many physicians entered into this covenant before us?" Paula inquired, even as the voices in her mind already began whispering fragments of the reply. "Since the inception of this hospital, there have been 23, Dr. Vilas Boas responded. "A few persevered for decades. Others succumbed to madness in a matter of years. The longest tenure belonged to Dr. Esperidião Vasquez, who served for 47 years before finally yielding to the immense burden of accumulated knowledge. He is interred in the rear garden beneath the white rosebush that blossoms without cessation." Paula grasped that her own demise was already predetermined. The uncertainty lay not in whether she would descend into madness or take her own life, but precisely when. This preternatural knowledge functioned like spiritual radiation. Prolonged exposure inevitably resulted in profound mental and physical decay. Every subsequent surgery she performed would hasten the process, yet simultaneously salvage lives in ways that conventional medicine could never achieve. "Is there any means by which to dissolve the pact?" she inquired, despite recognizing the purely rhetorical nature of the question. "Only one," Dr. Vilas Boas offered a melancholy smile. "To find someone willing to voluntarily assume your post. But that seldom transpires. Most of us prefer shouldering the burden alone rather than condemning another to the same perpetual existence." Paula surveyed the operating theater, which now appeared profoundly altered. She could discern the historical strata of the location, the specters of every surgery ever performed there, the energetic imprints left by each patient who had perished upon those tables, the spiritual detritus of decades of medical ritual. The hospital was not merely an institution where people received treatment. It was a living archive of human agony, meticulously catalogued and preserved for ends that wholly transcended normal comprehension. "When do I officially commence?" Paula inquired, finally acquiescing to her destiny. "You have already begun," Dr. Vilas Boas countered. "Henceforth, every patient who crosses this threshold will be your spiritual charge. You will feel their arrival, you will instinctively know which techniques to deploy, you will comprehend the sacrifices requisite for their salvation." As if summoned by his utterance, the surgical suite intercom crackled with an urgent message. "Attention medical personnel. Multi-victim traffic accident inbound in 5 minutes. At least 3 critical cases. All available surgical teams report immediately." Paula felt an irresistible compulsion seize her. Her body moved autonomously, preparing instruments, marshalling medications, calibrating equipment with an efficiency that utterly surpassed her previous experience. The voices in her mind whispered detailed directives for procedures she had never learned, but now executed with flawless mastery. Dr. Vilas Boas watched with approbation. "Welcome to your new existence, Nurse Paula. May God have mercy on our souls, for the entities that now govern us assuredly will not." The first accident victims arrived at Santa Clara Hospital at 4:15 a.m., conveyed by ambulances whose sirens seemed to chant a funereal melody that Paula could now interpret as a specific lexicon. Every pitch, every modulation of frequency contained meticulous data concerning the victim's status, blood type, extent of injuries, estimated time until clinical demise. Her newfound spiritual acuity had transfigured common sounds into a complex form of preternatural communication. The first patient was a man approximately 40 years old, unconscious, with multiple fractures and severe internal hemorrhaging. When Paula placed her hands upon his chest to assess his respiration, an avalanche of visions flooded her mind. She saw his entire life in accelerated fragments, a childhood scarred by domestic violence, a failed marriage, 3 children he rarely visited, a career predicated upon petty dishonesties that corroded his self-esteem. More perturbing still, she could perceive his potential future. Should he survive the operation, he would morph into an utterly different person, more compassionate, yet burdened by spiritual scars that would plague him for decades. "Dr. Vilas Boas," Paula called out, her voice resonating with harmonies that caused the medical instruments to subtly vibrate. "This patient, I can see everything about him, past, present, future. Is this how it works now?" "This is how it has always functioned for those who have made the pact," he replied, preparing for the surgery with ritualized movements that were simultaneously medical and mystical. Complete knowledge of the patient is essential to determine which conventional techniques to employ and which other measures will be requisite. Paula grasped with burgeoning horror that the surgery would not merely be a medical procedure. It would be a ritual of transformation that would fundamentally alter the patient's soul. They would not simply save his physical life. They would reshape his spiritual essence, correcting character flaws through the supernatural manipulation of his energetic anatomy. The second victim was a young woman, roughly 25 years old, suffering from severe cranial trauma. When Paula approached her, the visions were even more intense. She witnessed a life squandered on addictions, toxic relationships, and self-destructive choices. But she also saw wasted potential, a brilliant intellect stifled by untreated depression, artistic talents never developed, a capacity for self-love that had never had the opportunity to flourish. "This one requires a complete reconstruction," Dr. Vilas Boas observed, examining the young woman's injuries. "Not only physical, but spiritual. Her patterns of self-destruction are so profoundly entrenched that conventional surgery would merely be a temporary deferral of her inevitable death." Paula watched with fascination and revulsion as Dr. Vilas Boas commenced the procedure. His hands worked simultaneously on the patient's physical brain and on something she could only describe as her spiritual brain, an ethereal structure that occupied the same space as the material organ, but existed in a slightly displaced dimension. Every suture he placed in the damaged cerebral tissue corresponded to a repair in self-destructive behavioral patterns. Every bone fragment he removed carried specific traumatic memories with it. The third patient was the most unsettling, a 16-year-old adolescent who had been ejected from the vehicle during the accident. When Paula touched his skin, she didn't just see his individual life. She saw entire generations of his family. The boy was descended from a lineage that carried a genetic curse. Every generation yielded at least one member who died violently and prematurely. It was a pattern that had been repeating for over a century, an inherited spiritual debt demanding constant remittance. "This one is different," Paula murmured, feeling the voices in her mind whisper urgently. "His death is not merely an accident. It is part of a larger cycle. If we save him incorrectly, the familial curse will intensify and claim the lives of other relatives." Dr. Vilas Boas paused his work and looked at Paula with genuine approbation. "Excellent. You are learning to perceive beyond the individual. Truly efficacious medicine always considers generational ramifications. We need to break the cycle without creating imbalances elsewhere." The teenager's surgery was the most complex Paula had ever witnessed. Dr. Vilas Boas not only repaired his physical injuries, but performed a kind of genealogical surgery, severing invisible spiritual connections that bound the boy to his family's pattern of premature deaths. The process necessitated symbolic sacrifices. Small quantities of Paula's blood were mixed with herbal preparations and introduced directly into the patient's bloodstream, creating a new spiritual genetic signature that would liberate him from the familial curse. Throughout the entire procedure, Paula felt her own vitality gradually waning. Every supernatural technique she helped execute cost years of her own life. It was as if she were literally transferring lifespan from herself to the patients, paying with her own longevity for the impossible medical competence she now possessed. "How much time do I have?" she asked when they finished with the third patient. "It depends on how many surgeries like these you perform." Dr. Vilas Boas replied candidly, "If you restrict yourself to genuinely critical cases, perhaps 15 or 20 years. If you attempt to save everyone who crosses your path, perhaps 5 years. The choice is yours, but remember, every life you save through supernatural means creates waves of causality that will affect future generations." Paula looked at the 3 recovering patients, all stabilized against all medical odds. They would live, but they would forever bear the spiritual marks of the procedures that had saved their lives. In a sense, they were no longer wholly human. They were hybrids between the natural and the supernatural, products of a medicine that transcended the limitations of conventional science. "What if I refuse to perform any more surgeries like these?" Paula inquired. "Then you will descend into madness," Dr. Vilas Boas responded plainly. "The knowledge you now possess must be utilized, or it will consume your mind from within. It is akin to having a spiritual affliction that can only be managed through constant practice." Paula apprehended that her damnation was complete. She had become an instrument of forces she did not fully comprehend, condemned to save lives through methods that cost fragments of her own soul with every procedure carried out. In the months that followed that inaugural night of accursed surgeries, Paula discovered that her new existence adhered to patterns that defied all conventional medical logic. The most critical patients invariably arrived during the deepest hours of the night, as if an unseen force orchestrated the accidents and emergencies to coincide precisely with the times when the veil between the world of the living and the dead was thinnest. She had learned to recognize the portents. The hospital's ambient temperature would drop by several degrees. Electronic equipment exhibited subtle interferences, and the other staff members reported deeply disturbing dreams on the nights preceding the most severe cases. Dr. Vilas Boas had simultaneously become both her mentor and her spiritual jailer. During the day, he operated as a perfectly normal physician, performing conventional surgeries with admirable yet non-supernatural competence. It was only during the late hours of the night that his true nature was unveiled, when he transformed into a conduit for medical knowledge that transcended centuries of scientific evolution. Paula discovered that she, too, was developing this duality. During regular shifts, she was a competent, albeit ordinary, nurse. During the nightly rituals, she became something far more potent and infinitely more perilous. The case that haunted her most profoundly arrived on a frigid Tuesday in July. An 8-year-old child, the victim of a hit-and-run, presented with injuries so severe that any orthodox physician would have declared the patient clinically deceased. But when Paula placed her hands upon the small, broken body, the visions she experienced differed from all previous ones. Instead of seeing the child's life, she perceived hundreds of lives. All the people that child would save if she lived, all the scientific breakthroughs she would achieve, all the works of art she would create. It was as though the universe were demonstrating to Paula precisely the magnitude of creativity and kindness that would be forfeited if she allowed the child to perish. The surgery spanned 7 hours. Dr. Vilas Boas operated with an intensity Paula had never witnessed, his hands moving in patterns that seemed to trace symbols in the air as he reconstructed not only the child's body but also its very connection to life. Paula served as a conduit for energies she did not comprehend, feeling her life force being drained directly through her palms and transferred into the dying child. When they finished, the child not only survived, she recovered completely in a time frame that defied all medical expectations. However, the toll was devastating. Paula visibly aged during that single night, developing wrinkles around her eyes and strands of gray hair that had not existed when the surgery commenced. Dr. Vilas Boas explained that procedures performed on children demanded proportionally greater sacrifices because their potential lifespans were longer and more impactful. "You saved not just one life, but hundreds of future lives she will positively influence," he stated, watching Paula examine her newly aged appearance in the bathroom mirror. "The cosmos recognizes this and exacts its due." Paula began keeping a journal, documenting not merely the medical procedures, but the spiritual transformations she was undergoing. Each entry revealed a gradual deterioration of her original humanity and her evolution into something she could only describe as a benevolent angel of death, an entity whose existence was devoted exclusively to preventing premature demise, regardless of the personal cost. The journal pages revealed disturbing patterns. The patients she saved through supernatural methods developed a type of spiritual dependence on Santa Clara Hospital. They returned periodically, not necessarily ill, but compelled by an inexplicable need to be near the location where their lives had been preserved through impossible means. Dr. Vilas Boas explained that this was normal. Every person saved by cursed surgery maintained a permanent connection to the hospital, becoming part of a spiritual network that sustained the locale's supernatural operation. "We are like spiritual gardeners," he said during one of his nocturnal explanations. "Every person we save becomes part of the garden. They grow, they flourish, they reproduce, but their roots remain forever connected to this hallowed ground." Paula discovered that she could perceive all former patients simultaneously, a collective consciousness comprising hundreds of lives she had touched directly or indirectly. It was a sensation of profound connection, but also of crushing responsibility. Not only had she saved their lives, she had become eternally beholden to their continued spiritual welfare. The most disturbing aspect of her new existence was the gradual erosion of her original identity. Paula realized that her memories from before the pact were beginning to fade, superseded by the recollections of every life she had saved. Her own childhood experiences were being overwritten by the collective experiences of her patients. It was as if she were slowly dissolving into a greater consciousness, forfeiting her individuality to become a living repository of preserved human histories. Dr. Vilas Boas confirmed that this too was a standard component of the process. "Eventually, you will cease to exist as Paula and become something greater, an entity that embodies every life you have saved. This is why madness is unavoidable. The human mind was not engineered to contain multiple simultaneous existences." One evening, Paula discovered antiquated photographs in Dr. Vilas Boas's office, images of the physicians who had entered the pact before them. As the years elapsed in the photographs, she could discern the gradual transformation. Faces that began human and unremarkable slowly morphed into something else entirely. Eyes that reflected impossible cognizance, expressions that suggested a dreadful wisdom gleaned through extreme suffering. "How much time do you have left?" Paula inquired, studying the most recent photograph of Dr. Vilas Boas. "Perhaps 2 years," he replied placidly. "Perhaps less. It depends on how many critical cases still arrive. Every life I save accelerates my own final transformation. And afterward, I will join the voices that now murmur in your mind. I will become part of the collective consciousness that guides this institution, and you will fully assume my position until your own hour arrives to transcend individual humanity." Paula grasped that she had become part of a cycle that had replicated itself for generations. Santa Clara Hospital was far more than a medical institution. It was a spiritual organism that preyed upon the vital essence of dedicated physicians, offering in return competencies that saved lives deemed impossible to rescue through conventional means. That night, she made her final diary entry as Paula. "I am transforming into something I do not recognize, yet which I accept as necessary. If anyone finds these words, know that every life saved in this place cost pieces of the soul of the one who saved it. We are medical phantoms, caught between life and death, eternally dedicated to preventing others from making the same crossing prematurely. 2 years after that initial transformative night, Paula no longer recognized herself in the mirror. The reflection staring back was that of a woman who seemed to carry the weight of centuries in her eyes, although her face retained an ethereal and unsettling beauty, as if she were perpetually suspended between life and death. Her hair, now completely white, shimmered with a subtle luminescence in the darkness, and her skin had acquired a translucent pallor that revealed bluish veins pulsing with a rhythm that did not correspond to her heartbeat. Dr. Vilas Boas had departed the previous week, not through conventional death, but through a gradual dissolution that Paula witnessed with fascination and terror. During his final surgery, an impossible case involving a pregnant woman who had suffered cardiac arrest during childbirth, she watched her mentor literally unravel as he worked, his hands turning translucent, then ethereal, until only his voice remained, whispering instructions that were now part of the chorus of consciousnesses permanently inhabiting Paula's mind. The transition is nearly complete, the collective voices murmured in her head as she prepared the operating room for another nightly case. Soon you will understand that individuality is an illusion. We are all part of the same spiritual organism, eternally dedicated to the preservation of life through methods that transcend human understanding. The hospital had visibly changed during Paula's 2 years of service. The walls seemed to breathe subtly, as if the building itself had developed a consciousness. Impossible plants grew in the dark corners of the corridors, flowers that bloomed only with nutrients extracted from human life force, their petals glowing with a light that was not entirely natural. The back garden, where the previous doctors were interred, had transformed into something that defied the laws of botany. Trees that grew in perfect spirals, grass that maintained a vibrant green even in the harshest winter, and that white rose bush Dr. Vilas Boas had mentioned, whose blossoms never withered and exuded a scent that induced prophetic dreams in anyone who inhaled it. Paula had meticulously documented every transformation in her journal, which now filled dozens of volumes. The most recent pages were no longer written not solely hers. Other scripts spontaneously manifested on the paper, contributions from all the medical consciousnesses that now occupied her mind. It was as though decades of supernatural medical knowledge were being perpetually updated and augmented through her singular experience. The most unsettling epiphany struck when Paula realized that Santa Clara Hospital was not unique. Via the voices in her mind, she accessed a global network of analogous institutions, hospitals, clinics, and medical centers dispersed across every continent, all functioning under the same esoteric principles, all sustained by physicians who had been prevailed upon to make similar covenants with forces that transcended conventional human comprehension. We constitute a segment of humanity's intrinsic spiritual immune system, the collective consciousness delineated during her nocturnal meditations. Each such hospital functions as an acupuncture point upon the civilization's energetic corpus, inhibiting the widespread dissemination of spiritual ailments through methods conventional medicine could neither grasp nor deploy. The incoming cases were invariably impossible. Children born with conditions that defied medical categorization, accident victims whose injuries should technically have resulted in instantaneous mortality, patients afflicted by maladies that appeared supernaturally vitiated. Paula had developed techniques that conflated physical surgery with the direct manipulation of life force, procedures that salvaged lives through methods any external observer would deem miraculous. Yet, every miracle further eroded her residual humanity. Paula found that her personal recollections were being systematically supplanted by a collective repository of every life she had salvaged. She recalled the childhoods of patients as if they were her own formative years, vicariously experienced the labor pains of women she had assisted, and incurred the trauma of accidents she had witnessed merely through the minds of her victims. The isolation was absolute and unfettered. Paula was unable to sustain relationships with ordinary people, as her presence invariably induced portentous dreams in them concerning their own future demise. She could not physically contact another human without instantaneously experiencing the totality of suffering that individual would confront throughout their lifespan. She had morphed into a living crucible of human anguish, essential for the operation of the spiritual mechanism that maintained the crucial equilibrium between life and death. In the final entry of her journal, Paula wrote in a script that was no longer entirely her own. "I now comprehend that we are not saviors, but custodians of a terrible secret. The human life is far more fragile than anyone imagines, sustained by a delicate equilibrium that demands constant sacrifices from the few to benefit the many. We are the ones who bear the burden of this knowledge, condemned to eternal solitude so that others may live in blessed ignorance." When the next critical case arrived, an entire family victimized by an accident that should have resulted in multiple fatalities, Paula worked with a proficiency that transcended any possible medical training. Her hands moved independently of her conscious will, guided by the collective wisdom of generations of physicians who had made the same sacrifice. She saved all the victims, but upon concluding the final procedure, she realized that her own hands had become translucent. Her transition had begun. Soon she would join the chorus of voices guiding the next physician destined to make the pact, and the cycle would continue, as it had for centuries, and as it would for many more centuries to come. Santa Clara Hospital would remain, its corridors echoing with whispers of all those who had sacrificed their individual humanity to preserve the collective humanity. And somewhere, another young medical professional would feel the irresistible calling to work night shifts, unaware that they were slowly being prepared to bear a burden that would eternally define their existence. And thus another story comes to a close. Or was it merely a delusion? Sometimes the line separating reality from nightmare is thinner than we think. And do you still trust your own mind? Share your madness in the comments. To ensure you don't lose your sanity alone, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. We have more disturbances scheduled for next week. Sleep well if your conscience allows it. See you soon at the Portal of Dread.